Welcome to After Dark, a program about niche influential films of the 20th century. Now, the official title of this show is After Dark, Niche Influential Films of the 20th Century. I'm only going to be calling it After Dark in subsequent episodes of this show. It's a little wordy, a little too long, but I want you to know up front what this is going to be about. And today we're going to be talking about a foreign film from a highly regarded Japanese director named Takeshi Kitano. And Takeshi Kitano is not a name in the Western sphere that you would probably find familiar. But he was, at a time, one of the most popular Japanese actors, artists, comedians, and directors. He has a very interesting career trajectory where in the 1980s, he gains his footing as a comedian as part of a duo called the Two Beats. And that is where the name Beat Takashi comes from. Following that, he accidentally winds up getting into directing. Maybe half accidentally. He's cast in a film called Violent Cop, which was set to be directed by the man who directed Battle Royale. I'm not going to muck up his name. He took over the directing reins for that particular feature, and it launched his directing career, but he was not taken seriously as a director until the film we're going to be covering today, which is HANA-BI. Now, something you should know about Takeshi Kitano, the director, is that he's essentially built his entire filmmaking career on Yakuza films. And for those who are uninitiated, the Yakuza is just the Japanese mafia. So in Violent Cop, he is a cop taking down members of the Yakuza. He follows that up with Sonatine, where he plays a member of the Yakuza. Following that is a movie called Boiling Point. And Boiling Point feels like an evolved version of Sonatine with slightly more charm to it, but less interesting visuals as a whole. Then we get to HANA-BI in 1997. 1997, big year for Takeshi Kitano, a man whose comedy career was based around his cheatings. He winds up in a scandal because he is cheating on his wife. And around that time, he's releasing this film HANA-BI, which was originally called Kitano Volume 7. And I can only imagine in my head, if he goes ahead and calls this film Kitano Volume 7, what the trajectory of his film career would wind up being as a result of that. Something wildly different. It wouldn't get into Venice, I can almost assure you that, because things as simple as a title, a lot of people don't think that the title means much of anything in general on films or books, that it's all very secondary. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The title is essentially what's going to frame your story that you're trying to tell. I mean, that's the purpose of a title on paper, right? But then sometimes you have, and this really actually worked out in the movie's favor, you have instances like Cloverfield, which means nothing. I think J.J. Abrams, he was just driving by a highway or a street or what have you that was named Cloverfield. And that's how that movie wound up being titled that. But if it's called, Gigantic Monster Movie, or Godzilla Ripoff Part 3, there's less intrigue there. It's good to have an ominous title that will maybe frighten your audience, that will scare your audience. I directed my first feature in 1981, and it was called Lightbox. And the Lightbox, it was actually a World War II drama. I was very fortunate to get this movie where, Universal Pictures said, all right, you're a young up-and-comer. At the time, I was like 19 years old. You're a young up-and-comer. You want to handle one subject in particular. You tell me what that subject is. We're going to adapt that to film, and that's going to be your future. And I decided I wanted to do a World War II narrative from the perspective of a German soldier's wife. We got Clancy Brown from Pet Sematary 2 to play one of the Nazis, the Nazi husband, and the wife was played by a young Kathy Bates. And this movie flopped, this movie tanked. It was never released. It never came to theaters. There was no Redbox at the time, so there wasn't even that for an outlet. And it was a very unfortunate, shameful time in my career. I'm very lucky to be on the comeback trail, as they say, just shy of 51. So HANA-BI. HANA-BI is the most mature of the Takeshi Kitano Yakuza films. It's him at his most reserved. You see where he starts with Violent Cop, and it feels like there's a seed of an idea in that. But it is not his movie, really. It's not his idea. It's not his script. He was strictly supposed to be the lead actor, and all the indulgences that came afterward were guided by those who had professional experience behind the camera. And so when he does do Sonatine, there are the more artistic flourishes within that. He starts to get an eye for composition, and I think he begins to come into his own as a crime director. With HANA-BI and with Boiling Point, which precedes this film, it feels like he's trying to perfect a certain kind of story. These four films, Violent Cop, Sonatine, Boiling Point, and HANA-BI, all seem to blend together, where he takes on essentially the same role. He's doing the same movie each time with little tweaks here and there. And then he does something a bit different with this last one that winds up working out to enormous benefit, creatively and generally speaking. So by Boiling Point, he's starting to get the formula down that he needs to make a successful Yakuza film. With HANA-BI, he knows what he has to do, but then he adds a brand new element to that, which is a romantic angle. There's a love angle to this film. In many ways, it feels like after you've strategically conjured up a way to beat a video game level that you were struggling with. Not greatly struggling with. You kind of got the hang of it on the first go around, you do it a second time and you're picking up more coins or whatever you're doing. And then by the fourth time, you're taking a leisurely stroll because you know you can just cruise right. You know all the nooks and crannies to what it is that you're navigating. And when he reaches that point of his career, that's where we get to see him messing around with certain aspects of the thing that he has gotten to know so well and elevating it as a creative piece of fiction. The last 30 minutes of HANA-BI take on a different form than anything that had come before. That includes this film and also the other films in this specific genre of cinema that he had ventured into. In the past, when we see Sonatine, when we see Boiling Point, he goes for a more violent and comedic angle in how to resolve the film. Same rule applies to Violent Cop, which really isn't a violent movie on the whole. But that ending is certainly dark. And, one thing that you can credit Takeshi Kitano with is that his endings, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're bleak, but they definitely go for it in a way that I don't think an American director would go for it. So, HANA-BI, you have a character, and I'm not remembering his name off the top of my head, but luckily, I've got my Takeshi Kitano box set right here with me, and Sonatine, which was not included with that. And we've got these really have terrible art to them. Film Movement, which is, I guess, I think they might be based in Canada or somewhere. I don't know. They put together a fairly good box set. The remastering on the Kitano films are great. One thing that is not great, the cover art. And the cover art is maybe the most important thing, aside from the movie itself. The cover art on this, I'm not sure if this is even really going to come up. It's just Kitano looking down at a fire with his cool guy glasses on, like I got my cool guy glasses on. And that's one thing I want to get into with this movie too, is he creates a look that he winds up keeping throughout several films, much like me in some early sketches, pre-comfort systems. You develop a look, you create the character, you slip into the character, everything else comes easier. You no longer have feelings for the humans around you, and you can get away with a lot. You can do some bad, evil things. That's not something I would personally do at all.
And a suitcase, which arrived in Rome on a flight from Chicago, contained equipment that could be used in bomb making. The person who checked it in late yesterday actually flew to London, where immigration authorities refused him entry and sent him back to the United States.
But Kitano here, he gets away with a lot in these films because he's got his cool guy glasses. But then also they decided to commission some artwork for these other two films, Violent Cop and Boiling Point, and the artwork is really ugly. It's I mean, look, you get some Asian faces on these covers, very unflattering stuff. This is like if you go to a plantation and you see the little what's her name from Gone with the Wind, Mammy. You see the Mammy salt shakers. Ugly stuff, really ugly stuff. I don't know who they thought they were appeasing with these covers. Really bad. So anyway, the point was I'm trying to figure out the character's name. I've got a booklet right here which has a nice little essay, and it also tells you the cast of characters and who they're all playing. It's very resourceful. So Nishi, there we go. I knew that. Takeshi Kitano plays Nishi in this film. Not the philosopher, but a Japanese man. Nishi has had a very rough road. His daughter dies prematurely, and his wife, who you can tell he is deeply in love with, has contracted leukemia, and she wears a baseball cap like a sick little boy in this movie. Like if you ever imagine, what the inside of a St. Jude's hospital looks like. It's a lot of little pale boys with dark circles around their eyes and a big old red cap. That's kind of his wife. I guess that's his type, And so she's sick. She's passing away. It also seems like her memory is starting to become impaired. She's not, her cognitive thinking is on the decline as well. And she looks fairly young, but I mean, you never know. Yeah. The Asian race does age much better than the white race. I'm a lucky exception where I'm middle-aged, but I look like a child. He's got all kinds of issues to solve with the Yakuza. He owes money to them, and he is in severe debt. He gets an outfit, he robs a bank, he should be good, right? Except the boss is all of a sudden like, well, hold on a second. What about the interest? Because whenever you owe money, there's going to be some interest culminated, especially if it's to seedy individuals. I once borrowed money from Hans. My wife was also sick with leukemia, and she needed an operation. And I said to Hans, you recently came into this great fortune through Chainlink, the cryptocurrency, which is our sponsor tonight for this show. You recently came into a great fortune via Chainlink, and there's all this money that you don't really need. Now, this money right here, it's very minuscule compared to your overall bank account, which I've seen many times. He flaunts it right in front of me. He says, hey, look how much money I made this week. And I'm eating a cold can of beans, because I can't afford to turn my microwave on. And, I say, hey, that's great, Hans. I'm happy for you, man. So I ask him for money, and he grants me the money. But he says, now you gotta suck my dick. So HANA-BI is a terrific film from the 90s. It did win the Golden Lion at Venice. I believe it's the Golden Lion, right?
Takeshi Kitano.
54回に及ぶベネチア映画祭の歴史、その中に日本作品としては実に39年ぶりというグランプリの栄誉が刻まれたのです。ベネチアのシンボル、金の翼をつけたライオンの像が北野監督に手渡されました。
It does elevate Kitano's career, and they try to. This actually happened a bit before, I believe. I believe Johnny Mnemonic was 1995. I could be wrong about that. They try to introduce Kitano to Western audiences before that. And Johnny Mnemonic is a failure. It's not really a good film. It has some interesting aesthetics to it, but that's about the nicest thing I could say. Instead, this movie winds up being a hit with Europeans, and it is noticed by Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino brings it over to the United States through his Rolling Thunder brand of videotapes, where he acquires foreign films to bring into the Western market, and hopefully, by putting his name and his face on a VHS box, an ugly VHS box. I think it's just Kitano holding a gun, and then you have, suave Tarantino in black and white making a face at the left-hand corner of the tape. It did work, though, because shortly after HANA-BI was released in the United States, they did give a theatrical release to Sonatine, his earlier film, and Kitano becomes a cult figure in America in the late 90s. That's around the time that his career falls apart in Japan because of that affair, because of that scandal. But because of all of that, he winds up being taken seriously as a filmmaker, as an artist. He's no longer just Beat Takeshi comedian, although, these films that he's directed are rich with comedy. He has impeccable comedic timing as a director, especially in this film, where he operates with a degree of physical comedy. It does transcend the cultural lines of things. And I find HANA-BI very funny in spite of its heavy subject matter and also just depressing ending. I won't talk about that too much because I want you to check out this movie, but it has a very bold ending with Kitano and the fate of his wife and everybody else. So HANA-BI is a great selection. I would actually recommend any of Kitano's early '90s films. I haven't had a super positive experience with anything that he directed after 2000. I know there's another film that is similar to this particular texture of filmmaking that he pioneered in the early '90s, a film called Brother with Omar Epps. And that's about him trying to integrate into South Central and be one of the brothers, thus the title. I heard that's not a very good movie. You can probably skip it. Anyway, that's going to conclude this episode of After Dark. I do have a podcast out where I'm talking about this film more at length for the Japan on Film podcast. If you want to check that out, that's somewhere on the internet. Dark web, probably. Anyway, thank you for joining me for the inaugural episode of After Dark, influential niche films of the 20th century. I've been LowRes Wonderbread, and I will catch you for the next one, hopefully. See you next month.
Indians.
The truth about Easy Rider, I'm going to spoil this film for you. It's a 50-year-old film. So
be warned, everybody dies. Everybody dies, and everybody dies violently and randomly, which is perfect